Balking pattern. Balking pattern is basically, as we all know, design patterns are basically solutions to the well-known problems of computer design, software design. Balking pattern is one of the concurrency pattern in which the resources, the access to resource is hindered based on the state of the resource. Let us take an example. Suppose there is a socket and there are four functions allowed on that socket: open connection, close connection, read and write. Now it is very obvious that the socket cannot be read or written. The data on socket cannot be read or data cannot be written on the socket without opening the connection. So if an API is called for reading that particular socket during the time when socket is not open, then how do we handle such situation? This is taken care of in the bulking pattern. This is just an example. Let us take another example of a printer. When printer is switched on, it takes some time, like 10-15 seconds, before the printer completely boots up, and only after it has successfully boot up, it takes the order for printing, right? So before that, if you shoot the order for printing, it will result into some error in your computer. Likewise, there are other resources also which are not accessible in certain states. So this pattern takes into account such resources in which all the APIs cannot be called in all the states, like the case of socket, the case of printer, and it depends on the typical problem that you are facing in your system. Now, this is a design pattern which is debated by the specialists, the computer designers, because some specialists think that this is not a pattern. They believe that it is the anti-pattern. Now, what is the anti-pattern? Anti-pattern is basically the common problems or common mistakes done by the designers. They think that out of several approaches used for solving this bulking pattern, only one of the approach is the best and rest all is a mistake by the designer. So rather we'll not get into the debate of whether it is a pattern or anti-pattern. What we'll do, we'll discuss all the solutions, and depending on your approach or your own understanding, you can take a particular approach here. So let us take the example of a socket. So suppose there is a socket class in your system. This socket class has a function open, let's say open connection. This open connection will start the negotiation with the remote end, and this does take some time. During this time, the socket is in a transient state and the read and write operations is not possible. So read and write is not possible during this state when the connection is being opened. So, but still read and write is exposed by this class. So it can be called by the class. So what we can do, how we can handle it, suppose the read or write is called in the state, let's say socket is in two states. One is 0, which is initializing, and 1 means connected. So when the socket is in 0 state, it means that the read and write operations are meaningless. So if it is called, then we can throw the exception, and the well-known exception in Java class is illegal state exception. So the illegal state exception can be thrown, or other custom exceptions can be thrown, or some error can be returned by the API. That can also be done. So this is one of the approach to hinder the access to the resource during invalid state. Another approach is to implement a wait, a sleep for some time. So when the read or write API is called, the API is blocked and it waits for the correct state to arrive, and after that it executes the read or write operation. And then the third approach is to not expose the APIs which cannot be handled by the class in all the states. Now, what does this mean? Socket is exposing read and write methods even though read and write are not handled in every state. So what it should do is, it should only expose the open and close connection. So when open connection is called, the socket should initiate the remote negotiation, and after the negotiation is over, socket should return some object, or some object, let's say we call it a stream object, and this stream object returned by the socket should have functions for read and write. Now this object is returned only after the connection has been created, so there is no issue of invalid state, because this object comes alive only when the connection has been initialized properly, and only this object has the functions for read and write, so there is no chance of making call to socket with read and write because it doesn't expose that particular function. So this third approach is the one that I consider it to be the best one, and similarly the other specialists also consider it to be the best one. So that's why they call it an anti-pattern, because the other approaches they regard as a common mistake by the designers.